Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Chris from Boswell. I'm the bookseller here, and I am chatting with Kevin Barry, who we are thrilled to be hosting on Friday, July 12th at 6:30 at the store. We thought we'd ask him. We're so excited to chat with him Friday that we couldn't wait. So we thought we'd ask him a few questions in advance about The Heart in Winter. It's his new novel, and it's absolutely wonderful. Daniel and I both read it here at the store and called it Perverse, Profane, and Poetry. So Kevin, welcome. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Chris. It's great of you to have me in. Thanks.
For sure. So first, I was like, can you give us maybe like the two-sentence pitch for the book?
Yeah, it's a Western with Irish accents. So that's a pretty quick pitch, I guess. Yeah, it's an old migration story, really.
Mhm.
In the 1890s, 10,000 Irish copper miners moved from County Cork in Ireland to Butte, Montana, en masse, because there was good money to be made in the mines. They were electrifying America. All the miners moved out there, and it became this crazy little Irish town high in the Rocky Mountains. And this is our setting for a fantastic love story that takes hold between a kind of a local Irish poet, uh, very degenerate young man called Tom Rourke, and a young bride who's just arrived to marry someone else called Polly Gillespie. And it's a love story. It's a Western. Um, and it was a lot of fun to write. I've been threatening to write a Western for a long time.
Yeah, I've read this took you started this maybe 25 years ago almost and then set it aside.
Yeah, I made my first attempt at it 25 years ago in 1999 as a very young man. That was when I made my research trip to Butte. I went out there and I got loads of great material about the city in its 1890s kind of copper boom heyday, and had great material about the bars and the opium parlors and the brothels and all the races who came to town. And it was a great multicultural spot. And I wrote something like 100,000 words at the time, but I just didn't have the right characters yet. And they appeared to me 22 years later when I was on a walk here in County Sligo. I just knew suddenly this was a story about runaway lovers called Tom and Polly, and Butte, Montana was the setting for it.
It's quite a way for that to come together. So Tom, the protagonist, our hero, he's well versed in love. He keeps himself in both booze and opium by writing letters for the other miners in Montana to woo women to come out unseen and marry these men. Is this a real job of the time?
It was. There
It
were
was.
these guys operating in bars, writing these letters. A lot of the Irish miners at the time wouldn't have been fully literate. And a
Mm.
lot of others just wouldn't have been comfortable writing letters to women. They wouldn't know what to say to these women they were trying to tempt out to marry them. But Tom has a kind of a silver-tongued way with words, and he's able to do this. But yeah, everything in the story is based on what was going on in the city at the time. All the bars and premises named in the book existed. I even got to visit the last brothel in Butte in 1999. It had just closed for business, and the lady called
Mm.
Norma Jean, the last madam, was just reopening as a brothel museum. So I saw where the girls had worked in the 1890s. It was crazy, crazy visit. So it was yeah, it was an interesting town back then, Butte.
Yeah, so the way we're talking about it, I mean, it says it's very historical, very research heavy, but one of the things I love about this book is it's both so poetic, so condensed, but it's also so very funny. I mean, from very subtle wordplay throughout it to there are moments of almost slapstick throughout this kind of
Yeah.
adventure. Are you trying to be funny as you write? Do you think of yourself as funny?
Yeah, like I think that essentially I'm a comic writer.
Mm,
It's always my tactic is to try get the reader laughing, because a laugh is a physical response, and if the reader laughs, it means they're opening up to you, in a very physical way, and then you can really go in with the heavier stuff and the more poignant stuff, and with the feeling, the feels, you know. So yeah, I as a reader and as a writer, I tend towards the comic, but it's certainly very Irish comedy, so quite dark, quite black comedy. But it's definitely there. And yeah, I must say the book was a joy to write. A Western naturally gives you momentum and propulsion and pace, just the genre itself.
Hmm.
People are forever jumping up on horses and lighting out for fresh territory. Stuff is going to happen. So it's very kind to the writer in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, doors are being kicked in and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that as a writer too. It's one of those it's a classic trick, the
Yeah.
laugh at this, look over here, so I can punch you in the stomach later.
Absolutely, yeah. Some writers say they don't think about the reader very much, but I'm always thinking about the reader
Hmm.
and in a pugilistic way, How am I going to destroy them in,
I
in
love it.
this?
I love that. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you think there's maybe something, because it is interesting, it's your first book set in America. Do you think there's something about the Irish or the Irish Americans you could say writing a book set in America that maybe you couldn't say about them in your other books that have been set mostly in Europe?
Oh, I'm happy to say it all the time about these terrible people, the Irish. Now the great thing about having a native diaspora, about
Hmm.
having a nation of migrants, we've always been economic migrants for hundreds of years in Ireland. We almost invented it as a thing, going off around the world looking for work. It really opens up your fiction in terms of the possibilities of location. You can put these mix anywhere in the world, and it's believable because we've always gone wherever the four winds will take us. So it's a happy thing for a writer to have this background.
Dude, I think one thing I do want to ask you is the book, it's as a friend of mine might say, it's very potty mouthed. And you're known for writing dirty, foul-mouthed books at the same time that are beautiful, poetic. This one is just sentence after sentence. Each one's just a stunner, and that's something that drew me in immediately to the book. So I want to know, just as a writer, how do you go about that? How do you think about turning the profane into poetry?
Yeah, it's a very difficult balance actually. One of the great examples out there in the Western form is the glorious television show Deadwood,
Mm,
um, which had that balance beautifully got. I always think profanity is very interesting because it's a defensive use of language. It's your characters when they're being potty mouthed and speaking dirty, they're putting up a shield. It's a shield to kind of to stop anything getting at them in terms of, what's their real feeling, what's their real position on something. And it's very interesting to think about it in that way. I think pragmatically, Irish copper miners in bars in Butte, Montana in 1891 weren't speaking drawing room English. They were going to give it like it is. What I love about Deadwood, to go back to the way the language is got in that, is the way it uses almost an Elizabethan or Shakespearean register, which doesn't necessarily mean that's the way they spoke in North Dakota in the 1870s.
sure.
But it feels right. And that's all that's important about dialogue, I think, is it has to feel right, and the reader has to buy it straight away, going, yeah, I can hear these old Irish guys in this bar 150 years ago or whatever it is.
Yeah. Speaking of those eras too, I kind of love how the book is set at what feels like the end of the Wild West era too. It feels like
Yeah.
something's coming to a close and almost falling apart.
Yeah. Like at one point, Tom finds a newspaper article about how to write the rules for writing Western adventures. And this was going on at the time. Westerns were appearing from the 1870s even. So the West is starting to mythologize itself
Mhm.
already. And also 1891 is a good time to go in because it's the start of electrification, and it's the start of the places lighting up. And also every main street now has a photographic studio. So for the very first time, really ordinary working class people are thinking about how they look and are trying on images and trying on kind of, auras and personas. So it's really very much the birth of our kind of world, I think, in an interesting way. And Tom and Polly are very taken with how they look together, and they're trying to make themselves into outlaws essentially. So yeah, it's a fun time to write about.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love, and I think you captured so well in this book how both they want the adventure, but they also want, as much as the adventure, perhaps they want the story to tell of their adventure.
Absolutely, and it's said several times that they can kind of they're looking at each other they're looking at themselves from above.
Yeah.
They're almost imagining the film of it somewhere down the line.
Well, I could ask you questions for the rest of the day, but you have an afternoon to fill, and I have a morning here to fill in Milwaukee. So we will look forward to seeing you again in this coming week. Have a fabulous weekend. And
Uh,
Kevin, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I can't wait. My first trip to the Badger State. Am I getting that right?
Yes,
Uh,
bingo.
my first trip to the Badger State next week, so I can't wait.